The truth is out here somewhere. Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 13 of The X-Files. It's called Beyond the Sea. And this felt like a fairly important episode, at least from a character perspective, for Scully. It's a Scully-focused episode. And it's about the death of her father. We get introduced to her parents as they're leaving after visiting for Christmas at the start of the episode. And we get this kind of surreal moment where she sees her father sitting in the room with her right before she gets a phone call that he's passed away. So it's a sort of supernatural moment for her that she gets to experience. And obviously Scully's been the skeptic throughout the show, and Mulder's the one with these backstories of the sister being abducted by aliens, and he's the first one to jump in and believe anything that anyone says about the supernatural. So this episode flips that, and Mulder is the skeptical one, which Scully even points out when he sounds skeptical, and Scully's the one who's actually believing things. But she's not debating with Mulder, because as we get to at the end of the episode, you know, I think I noticed during this one that Mulder says the phrase "I want to believe again," and it's a much more smaller context where he says it, but he says "I want to believe." And I think it was intentional they had him say that again, because the episode ends with Scully saying the line that she's afraid to believe. And it almost feels like this episode took her skepticism that she always has and gave it depth. And it didn't really need depth necessarily, but it's nice that they've given it this. They've given it this idea that she's scared to believe in any of this stuff because that's sort of admitting there's more out there that she doesn't understand. It'll make her, you know, this idea that there's this big unknown that will make you feel really small and make you feel inconsequential, that how can you possibly fight against these forces when they're this vast and they're this mysterious and all these other things. I'm not saying it's just about that, but that's kind of the vibe of like why someone would be scared. But they add some depth to it because they have her make this decision by the end of the episode, after, you know, being kind of convinced but not wanting to admit it to Mulder. It's that one of the most frustrating things about this episode is that every time it comes up whether or not to believe if this guy in the episode is a psychic or not, this death row inmate played by Brad Dourif, who's got information about a kidnapping that's going to turn into a murder, and we'll get into all that plot in a minute, but she keeps saying, but what about this? But what about this? Without ever actually saying she believes that he's a psychic. It gets kind of frustrating, and not in a bad way. I'm not critiquing this, but it's a little frustrating that she never just actually tells Mulder why she's kind of convinced, which is that Brad Dourif's character sings a song that was important to her parents. You know, it connects, you know, to the memories of her father. It becomes relevant that she just lost her father in this storyline. And he claims to have a message from her dad, which even after he helps catch the bad guy and he gives correct information, and Scully seems like she's maybe just fully believing it by this point really late in the episode, he says he'll give the message when he's being executed. He says, you know, when I'm sitting in that chair, be there as my witness, and I will pass on the message from your father. I think the ending is my favorite part of the whole episode because Scully just doesn't show up. She's not there. And this death row inmate has to die alone, looking at the ghosts of his family who he killed at Thanksgiving, you know, some years ago. And it's this really sad death, and it's like he wanted someone there to believe in him, or, you know, I mean, we could probably, I feel like there's probably a thesis to write about this character and like how much of him is good now, how much of a redemptive idea is it, or is he just scared because he's going to die, so he's sort of reaching out to be good in ways? Is it cynical? Is it just an attempt to stave off death? But he does make a couple of decisions that feel kind of selfless as well. He still helps even when he's not going to get a stay from execution. He does make that choice, so maybe at that point he just wants to have someone to care about him, and that by helping do this before he dies as a selfless act, he thinks it'll achieve that maybe. But anyway, Scully doesn't show up. And there's one scene at the end where Scully goes to visit Mulder, who's in hospital because he got shot earlier in the episode, and asks him, or is explaining to him, basically she's trying to justify why this was all fake, why it wasn't really a psychic. He could have known I was your partner. He could have found out what song played at my parents' wedding, and she's doing all this. And she's obviously explained to Mulder all the stuff she's seen in the episode. She's seen, you know, her dad sitting in her room, the fact that Brad Dourif said things that only her father would maybe know, or reference stuff that their parents would only know. She's obviously explained this to Mulder, because for the first time in the episode, Mulder's actually not being skeptical. Because the whole episode, every time this guy comes up, Mulder says, oh no, he's working with the kidnapper, that's why he knows things. Like, this is all just a ploy to get back at me, and he's super skeptical. But at this moment at the end, when he's lying in the hospital bed, he says, after all this evidence, why can't you believe? It almost seems like off camera, when she explained all the reasons why maybe he was really psychic, she's actually convinced Mulder. Or at the very least, he understands why she wants to or should believe it himself, because, you know, he's not a hypocrite based on all the things he believes in. Which, by the way, I love at the start, he does say, oh no, I believe in psychics, absolutely, 100%, those definitely exist, but this guy's just faking. Which, you know, makes sense. Even if there are real psychics, some are going to be faking. There's no denying that. But that's a really sort of quiet end to the episode. It ends on a quiet moment where it just cuts to credits on a quiet little thing where he says, why can't you believe? And she says, I'm scared, or I'm afraid of believing. To which he says, well, even if it meant like not finding out what your father was going to say. She says she already knew what he was going to say, because he was my father, is the line. Which ties back into, because her mother said that line at the funeral earlier on in the episode, when Scully asked, was he actually proud of me? We get this, like, we get the implication that he's not very proud that she chose this career path. He's a military man, which is funny because the actor Don Davis was a military man in Twin Peaks as well. So that was, it's like he's slot. But even the creepy scene where he's sitting there saying something, because the whole scene at the start when she sees him, he's sitting there saying something, but there's no audio, right? There's no sound coming from his mouth, but he's clearly saying something. That felt like a David Lynch moment. The fact that I know this actor from Twin Peaks, and then that's the scene, that's the big prominent scene he gets in this, was kind of wild. I will let out a little critique here. This is a very minor nitpick, but at that funeral scene, when the mum says this line, when Scully says, you know, can you let me know, was Dad actually proud of me? The mum says, he was your father, right? And then Scully references that at the end, and it's kind of like, no, she doesn't need to know, and it's kind of accepting that there are some stuff that's the unknown, and it's accepting not taking the supernatural offer that she's been given, you know, all these things. Very good moment at the end. I like the quiet note that it ends on. But the critique I have is that I had to like go back twice and listen to what the mum said in this scene, because I actually couldn't tell what she said. I actually ended up turning on the subtitles just for that 10 seconds just to read what she said, because she blubbers it and mumbles it in such a way that I could not decipher the sentence. And then when I finally read the subtitles and it said, he was your father, I still didn't hear that when I read it. I still just sort of heard you know, yes, or something. Like, so it's a very minor quibble. I'm just imagining watching this in 1993 or 1994, and you know, it's on a standard definition with low quality audio over the TV aerial. I can't imagine how audible this line was. Now that I'm watching it in 5.1 surround sound with the HD and all that shit, and I still couldn't make out the damn thing she was saying. Minor quibble. But yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very Scully focused episode. It's got different layers of what it's doing for Scully here as well. There's the sort of more surface level thing, which is the wanting to know that her father was proud of her and losing her confidence, and then her questioning herself throughout the episode at her work, that she's still capable of doing it. You know, she, after Brad Dourif like sort of says some stuff as her father, she kind of freaks out a little bit and is told to kind of go back to the hotel and stuff like that. And I think it's very important that Mulder halfway throughout the episode is taken out of the picture, so that she has to kind of do the rest on her own. She has to make these choices on her own. So it ends up being kind of a poignant episode about dealing with the death of a loved one and kind of like coming to terms with what you know about them. It works two ways. It works in the way that I said before, where she's scared of like confirming that all this stuff exists, you know, hence the I'm scared to believe line. But it also is a positive side to it, which is she doesn't need the supernatural like answer to like give her something that her father was thought about or told her. She learns to she realizes to kind of accept what she knows in a sort of normal way. In real life, when someone dies and you kind of know them well enough that you have to kind of accept that you know what they thought of you, because you can't ask them anymore. And even in the face of giving this option to kind of get an answer, she sort of chooses the healthier thing to actually accept what she can know. And I thought that was an interesting sort of dual way of looking at the ending, and like it accomplishes these two different things at the same time. So one neatly closes off the story of the episode, which is her confidence is shaken, and she has to sort of find that again and sort of believe that her father did, was proud of her, did consider her successful at what she did, and get her mojo back, if you want to put it that way. But then there's the ongoing character thing that it sets up, is like why she in some ways is skeptical. It's not just about being cynical, it's not just about being jaded and not believing in spectacular things. It's just there's a bit more to it than that. It's tied in with, if this is real, it kind of reshapes everything she thinks and knows about the world, and possibly makes her feel small. So it's hard to just jump in and believe. Mulder had this big experience when he was a kid, and that's why he's went down the path he's went down his entire life. But Scully hasn't had that, and she's repeatedly challenged in this episode with Brad Dourif knowing things about her parents, knowing like an incident from her childhood, and there's explanations for why he knows things about the crime scenes or where the killer is, because they think he's working with this guy, that this was his partner on the outside. But one of my favorite moments of the episode is actually because it's rule of threes, right? So there's 3 times where he gives them information and they go and find stuff related to that information. The first time is when he's describing the location, and there's like, he talks about waterfalls but not really, and like an angel, and that ends up being this motel, and there's like a little warehouse next to it, and Scully finds like where the killer and the victims have been at that point. And then the second time, and this is the moment I really like, is he warns Mulder not to go near the White Cross. It'll be, covered in your blood or something. I can't remember the exact phrasing of the line. But they go out to apprehend this killer, and he gets away, but on his way out at the docks, he shoots Mulder, right? And Mulder goes down. And they actually rescue one of the 2 victims here, who identifies the killer after this. But when Mulder goes down and Scully's kind of putting her jacket over him and she's yelling for help, she looks up and sees this big white cross, and there's blood over it. One, it's not an accident that it's a cross, because obviously the idea of this being religious in some way, if ghosts in the afterlife exist, it may lend credence to the idea that there is some truth to God and religion and spiritualism. And it's also kind of, or even if you don't look at it that way, it does feel like a very spiritual moment, at least specifically for Scully. The way she looks up at this cross and we get this music playing, and I thought the vibe was really cool. The vibe that kind of washes over the episode at this point, where it's Scully really being confronted with the idea that there's things that she doesn't understand and maybe has to learn to accept them. And I think the episode's all the stronger for her not accepting them by the end. I think it sort of makes her a more complex character, that's not neatly tied off at the end. What gives it the layers is that by not accepting it by the end and sort of remaining kind of a bit more close-minded about all this, is that she's actually making a healthy choice about getting over her father at the same time. So there's actually a very good quality to the decision she makes at the end. But in terms of the overall story of the X-Files and her like learning to believe and all this shit that's happening, I think it's a very interesting dual thing at the, I don't even know if there's a term for this. Like, it's just layered is the best way I can describe it. The way it kind of works positively in one way but negative in another, and works for the character equally in both ways, and that it gives you a satisfying character ending to this story, but also leaves this thread open for more with her going forward. I think that's the biggest strength of this episode. But then you also have the the Brad Dourif character, who is very compelling, mainly because it's Brad Dourif who's playing him, and he's very good at playing this type of character. It is not the first thing I've seen him in where he's got a straitjacket on and he's sounding like a crazy person. That is something I've seen him play before. He's very good at it. He's good at the unhinged type of character. If anything, this might arguably be the most sympathetic version of this I've seen him play, because he might be redeeming himself. He might be now kind of in a better place. He keeps talking about the cold, dark place as well. And I think it's this idea that if his messages from beyond the grave are proving that the afterlife is real, then what he's done is guaranteeing that he is not going to a good place afterwards. And that kind of ties in with why he's so scared of being killed. Because they even mentioned that it was a near-death experience. He almost got gas chambered before, and for some reason they called it off at the last second, but he was sitting in the chair, and apparently that experience is what unlocked this channeling potential where he's connecting to the dead, he's connecting to the other world, or whatever it may be. And of course, it's played in such a way where you're sort of constantly questioning throughout, like, is there truth to this? You wonder why Scully's hearing things that she does believe this, even though she doesn't want to admit it. She's like terrified of admitting to Mulder that she's actually considering any of this, pretty much throughout the episode. I also thought the scene at the start of the episode where the killer / kidnapper like kidnaps the two kids, it felt very Zodiac. Actually, it's not been too long since I did Zodiac on our movie podcast, The Collector's Cut, which you can find over at Mail Fuzz Movies or on your podcast feeds. Oh, actually, that episode's not even been out yet, because we're doing David Fincher season, and that's coming in a few weeks' time from now. But we recorded that a while ago. It was very Zodiac, it's two teenagers in a car, and this guy with a torch comes up behind and demands that one of them get out of the car. He's pretending to be a police officer, and it reminded me a lot of Zodiac, and that may even be intentional, honestly. Not that the movie inspired it. I'm saying the actual Zodiac, crimes inspired it, to be specific. But I thought that was handled well. I thought it looked good. It had a nice, creepy, tense sort of feeling to it, which is really nice. It kind of set up the stakes. Maybe if anything, the predicament of having to save these two people who have been kidnapped. If I have any critique about the episode, is that maybe that they start to feel that they've taken a back seat as the episode goes on, and it's more just about Scully's story and whether or not she believes Brad Dourif, which is fine. That is the most important thing, and I get why that does take center stage. But almost like so much that the actual saving of the victims, especially the guy who's still a victim for longer, because he still needs to be rescued after the girl's saved, it almost does feel like they're just like a plot point now in the background, as opposed to it being like, oh, we actually care about really saving them. They're in jeopardy. We sympathize with them. I don't know if we really do. We're kind of more focused on the main character. Maybe that's just the sort of thing where it's a 45-minute episode. We only have so much time to focus on certain things, and we chose to focus on the Scully character story and development and her choices. And she's faced with choices repeatedly through this, where she has a lot of agency in this episode, which is, I think, also really strong and plays into the themes of her feeling like she doesn't have any choices, but she does. She repeatedly has choice in this episode. She chooses to pursue the first crime scene that she finds the evidence in, that the Brad Dourif pointed towards. She sees the signs that kind of link up with what he said. That's a moment where she could have chosen not to do that, but she did. She put herself in danger potentially by investigating. She chooses not to tell Mulder certain things, but she chooses to go back and talk to Brad Dourif again. She then chooses, she's constantly making choices in this episode, in an episode where she probably feels like there is not a lot of choice because her father was taken from her with no agency. And I think regaining that sense of control is a big part of the episode as well for Scully's character. So this is a really fascinating episode because of how it focuses on its story, where it kind of lets the plot of the week almost take a backseat as the episode goes on and just focuses on the section. Sometimes this is more subtext where it's just, they're trying to save someone or they're investigating a mysterious thing, and there'll be like themes in the main story that relate to Mulder or Scully, or possibly both. Here it's less subtext and more no, we're directly having this go, so it makes it feel like a big episode because the subtext is more text this episode, so it feels like it's more exposed, like it's like an open wound as opposed to a closed wound, I guess. I think there's maybe some interesting speculation, not that I have any like theories or answers, but when she sees her dad at the start of the episode sitting in the corner of the room and he's saying something but we can't hear him, obviously it's very creepy, but as for what he's saying is kind of interesting just because it doesn't seem, you know, he feels very kind of cold. He feels like he's sitting there, and that's probably what made me feel like it was a David Lynch scene, is kind of the eeriness of how he was sitting there. But it didn't seem like he was just being like, oh, Scully, I have to tell you that I'm proud of you and stuff. And they set up that maybe he is holding that back because before he leaves, he asks how work is, and it's kind of an awkward moment where she just says, yeah, it's great. And he just goes, oh, good then. And he walks off. And there's a little moment where it's like the wife is kind of nudging him to be like, hey, tell her you're proud of her, or, you know, show an interest in her work kind of thing. And he doesn't. So it does set up the idea that there's maybe a regret that he's going to have, that he didn't engage more and like let her know that he is proud of what she does and all these things. But it doesn't come across as like that's what he's saying in the scene. If anything, it feels more like, you know, it feels like in Twin Peaks when like the fireman or the tall man, whatever you want to call him, is like given a warning and he's kind of just stoically like saying like it's happening again or something like that. It feels like it's got that vibe to it. And it does make you wonder, and I'm sure people have probably tried to lip read what he's saying and things. You know, the fan base, I'm sure, went in deep on this. But it almost feels like he is maybe warning or something about something that's going to happen later in the season. Or maybe I'm just, I'm headcanoning this for it to be really cool, but it kind of feels that way in the moment to me. As opposed to him like trying to just say something that's unfinished business between them. Almost like because he's now in the afterlife, he can see events that are coming up because of something that he's seen there, and he's trying to convey that to Scully. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm going just off the deep end a little bit there. But yeah, really interesting episode. I think you're just switching the characters around, so Mulder's the skeptic and Scully's the one who believes in stuff, is quite interesting. And then even more so, the way they tackle it, where she doesn't just outright say that, she's too scared to actually admit that she believes it. So it adds an extra little layer to it where it's like, we're also dealing with the fact that she's ashamed or she's scared, as she says at the end of the episode, to believe or admit that she believes anything. And Mulder even kind of points that out, like when she finds the crime scene and then later on admits to Mulder that she lied about how she found it. You know, she said to the police that she saw suspicious activity and that's why she checked out this warehouse. But she didn't. She saw the signs that Brad Dourif gave her. And Mulder even says, hey, you didn't want to put that in your report because people expect that from me, but not from, you know, Special Agent Scully, who's the wunderkind of the X-Files, or sorry, of the FBI, I should say. So I think it's interesting that even he's like pointing that out before he has the full context, but it does tie into how she's feeling throughout the episode, is this fear of actually of believing. I the biggest compliment I can give this episode is that it took a very simple thing that this show has had since episode 1, which is that Scully's the skeptic, Mulder's the one who believes things, and it made it more than just, oh, she's being cynical, and it made it a core character defining thing. That the idea of admitting that any of this stuff could be true is actually terrifying, and made the concept of the whole show that this stuff is real and this stuff is out there and you do have to believe it, it made it all feel much scarier for the show. So it adds to the overall tone and like atmosphere of the show that it's weighing that much on her. So it actually helps prop up the entire spookiness of the show as well, on top of the character work. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and it felt like it had a really strong directorial hand between the moments with Scully believing and like questioning that belief, between her talking to Brad Dourif, who gives a bit of a good performance as well, I have to say, with the, you know, him saying how he's so scared of the gas chamber. I thought like that monologue was quite good. And then of course moments like the abduction at the start, and even the creepy moment with her dad sitting in the room, like all of them were directed very, very confidently, and they were all built to create very specific feelings and creepiness. in a way that, you know, I really complimented Squeeze back in episode 3 for being really strongly directed, and I think this is probably the best it's been directed since that episode. And I'm recognizing the name David Nutter, actually, now that I'm looking at the IMDb page. David Nutter is a pretty successful and well-known TV director who's done a lot of pilots of big shows and all the way up until a recent time. In fact, he might have done the pilot of this show. I might have mentioned that back when we started the show and I just don't remember. But anyway, that is my thoughts on this episode of The X-Files. Let me know what you think of this one in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a lot. As I've done, going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting us over there for however much per month. Helps keep the lights on, helps keep all the content coming, so please do if you like the stuff. I've been reviewing Columbo monthly as a Patreon/YouTube member exclusive, and having fun with that. So if that sounds like a fun thing you want to check out, then you get that for supporting us. So that is the show. Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?